Hello and welcome to this lab demonstration on using content libraries. After completing this lab video, you will be able to use content libraries to store virtual machine templates and to deploy virtual machines from content libraries. Did you ever run into a situation where you were looking for a virtual machine template on a vCenter server, but then you realized that it only exists on another vCenter server? Or you wanted to mount an ISO file, but it wasn't available at the site where you needed it? Content libraries help solve such issues. You can save virtual machine templates and other files, such as ISO images, in a content library and have it synchronized across sites and vCenter server instances. You can deploy virtual machines from a VM template in a content library. You can mount ISO files directly from content libraries. So content libraries are an excellent tool to manage your templates and files and make them available everywhere. Note that in the lab, we will only save a VM template to a content library and then deploy a virtual machine from that template. This means that we will only use a so-called local content library. We are not going to publish our content library from our server and configure a subscription on another vSphere server. For this lab, you should already be familiar with the vSphere client user interface, and you should know how to create VM templates and deploy virtual machines from VM templates. In the first task of this lab exercise, we will create a local content library. Then we will clone a VM template to a template in the content library that we just created. And in the last task of the lab, we will deploy a virtual machine using the VM template that is stored in the content library. And we will verify the deployed virtual machine. We will power it on and make sure that we can see a login prompt. I'm sure I provided you enough good reasons to watch the following video on using content libraries. Now let's get started. We want to perform the configuration on vCenter server SA VCSA01. So the first step is to connect to this server. Then we log in as administrator at vSphere.local. So the first task is quite simple. We want to create a local content library. To do this, we click on Menu and we select Content Libraries. Now in the right pane, we click Create. Now we enter the name of our content library. Let's use VM Library. We see that our vCenter server is selected. That's the vCenter server we are connected to. That's fine. So we click Next. Now you see that when you create a content library, you can either create a local content library. And if you do that, you can decide whether or not to publish the library. Or you could subscribe to a content library. In this lab, we are not going to show subscribing a content library. But nevertheless, when we create our local content library, we will enable publishing. You could configure authentication so that a subscriber has to be able to authenticate to get access to a published content library. But again, in our case, all we do is creating a local content library. We do enable publishing. We will not enable authentication. So we click Next. Now we have to select the data store and we want to use the vSAN data store. So we select it and we click Next. Now we review the configuration and then we click Finish. The content library is created. And once complete, we can see the library in the list on the right pane, as well as in the navigator pane. Our VM library is here, so it was successfully created. In the next task, we want to save a VM template in the content library. So what we have to do in this case is we have to clone an existing VM template to a template in a content library. So let's do that. We go to Menu, VMs and Templates. Now we open our ICM data center. In this data center we have a folder called Lab Templates, and there we have a VM template, Photon template. Now we right-click it and we select Clone to Library. So on top we have to decide whether we want to create a new template or update an existing template. Well, we want to create a new template in our VM library. So we have to select the VM library where we want to save that template. We only have one library, the one that we just created earlier. So we select this one, VM library. Now we have to provide a name for that template. So let's change the name from Photon template to Photon lib template library template. You see down here we could preserve the MAC address on the network adapters. By default this is not active, and we could include additional extra configuration. We don't do that in this lab, so we are happy with this configuration and therefore we click OK. In the recent tasks at the bottom, we can see that the template is exported to the content library. Files are getting uploaded to the content library. So we wait for this to complete. As we can see in the recent tasks, cloning the virtual machine template to the content library finished. So let's quickly check. And to do that, we go to Menu, Content Libraries. Now in the navigator pane, we select our library, VM library. Now in the right pane, when we click Templates, and we select OVF and OVA templates, then we see that our Photon lib template is listed here. It was stored in the content library. Now where we have a template in the content library, we want to deploy a virtual machine from that VM template. And that is our third and last task of this lab exercise. And we do that by right-clicking the entry. In our case, there is only a single entry, our Photon lib template. So we right-click it and we select New VM from this template. The first thing that we have to enter is the name of the virtual machine. Let's call it Photon 13. Then we have to select the location. We want to put the virtual machine to the SA data center. So we select that one. Then we click Next. Now we have to select the compute resource. So we select, or we expand our cluster SA Compute 01, and then we select an ESXi host. In our case, we want to use SA ESXi 04. Then we click Next. We can review the information. You can ignore that message that talks about the potential security risk. So we just check whether everything else is okay. And then we click Next. Now we have to select the data store. In our case, we want to use the vSAN data store. Then we click Next. Now we have to select the network. So under Destination Network, when we click here, we see a list of the available port groups, and we want to use port group VM Network. Then we click Next. We see a summary of what we configured. We can review it here, and then we click Finish. And again, we can watch the progress under the recent tasks. So currently, the OVF template is deployed to target Photon 13, our virtual machine. The tasks completed, so our virtual machine has been deployed. Now let's verify this. We go to Menu, VMs and Templates. Now we look at our SA data center, so we expand it, and we can see the deployed VM Photon 13 down here. Now let's verify that the VM works. We right-click the virtual machine and we select Power On. As we can see in the tasks at the bottom, the virtual machine is powered on. Now it is booting. Let's verify that. We select the virtual machine and now we open a web console. And in the web console, we can see that the virtual machine is currently booting. This will take a while, and once it's up and running, we should see a login prompt. The virtual machine booted and we see the welcome and login prompt. We successfully deployed the virtual machine from a content library. Congratulations, you have completed the Using Content Libraries lab demonstration video. In this lab, we created a local content library, we cloned a VM template to a template in the content library, and then we deployed a VM from the VM template that we stored in the content library. So in the lab, we were only dealing with a local content library. Maybe you remember when we created it, we configured our content library to be published. That means that on another vCenter server, we could subscribe the content library and that way have access to all the data that are stored in this content library. Just to let you know, when setting up such a synchronization, by default, only metadata are synchronized, which means on another vSphere server, you would see all the files, but they would not be transferred at that stage. This means that only at the first time when you want to access a file, it gets transferred, it gets synchronized to the other vCenter server instance. If you want to have instant access to the files on another vCenter server, then you can configure the synchronization in a way that all the files get synchronized immediately. So it's your choice. By default, it would be only metadata that gets synchronized, but you can change this to have all the data synchronized immediately. Thank you for watching this lab demonstration video. I hope the knowledge acquired here will help you with your daily job assignments, and good luck as you continue your journey in VMware world.